Lena's dad. Oh, I know. I couldn't get over there.
I feel the same way. I told him, I said, what did you have to sneeze? You have to hold that in. My goodness, I was like,
That metal thing on both sides, and it keeps it open.
Is that what keeps it on?
Yeah.
Did they numb them?
They give them sort of something that kind of goes a little.
They have to knock
But
me
it
out.
don't fully
I know, I
numb
just,
it on.
Oh,
Plants up here, but even there.
tell him I've asked him that.
Good evening, everyone. Our first song, 268, 268. But I have to sing like there's 500 in attendance, okay? Come on in, Sister Helen, we need you. We need you singing loud. Yeah, 268. You probably don't need a book. 268. I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and his glory, of Jesus and his love. I love to tell the story because I know 'tis true. It satisfies my longing as nothing else can do. I love to tell the story, will be my theme in glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and his love. I love to tell the story for those who know it best, seem hungering and thirsting to hear it like the rest. And when it sings the glory, I sing the new song. 'Twill be the old story that I have loved so long. I love to tell the story, 'twill be my theme in glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and his love.
Good evening. We're continuing our study in the book of Ephesians. We're in chapter 6. Ephesians chapter 6. Over the last few weeks, we were looking at, of course, through chapter 5, the husband-wife relationship as it's being paralleled to Christ and the church as far as the roles are concerned. The husband being the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church. And as we talked about, we're dealing with not equality, but a parallel picture, the similarity being a parallel. Christ is the head of the church, the husband's the head of the wife. The wife is in submission or subjection to her husband as the wife is, or did I just say that totally backwards? The wife is in subjection to her husband as the church is to Christ. And so in a parallel picture there, we see that both of them are wanting for the good of the other, and in doing so, the good of the whole. You know, when husbands and wives see their roles the way that they're supposed to, fill their roles the way that they're supposed to, they're working at serving each other, and in the end, by each striving to serve the other, they make the whole, the collective, the marriage better. And so the home can be what it's supposed to be when both people are working to be who they're supposed to be. And when children come into the picture, chapter 6, he moves right into the parent-child relationship. And notice first he talks to the children. Says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. He gives them a picture, of course, of the Old Testament law. The first one that he says carried a promise with it. And what was the promise? If you honor your father and mother, you'll live long on the earth. So we talked about that some last week. And as we're looking at the commandment given here, it's a statement of command, an imperative. Children, obey your parents in the Lord. Then he turns around and gives a statement of command also to fathers. Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath. So it's a statement given in the negative. Don't provoke your children to wrath. How do parents abuse children? The two main ways that we generally talk about abuse is in either overdoing, you giving them attention they don't need, or in the lack of attention. You're either going too far and not doing what's good for the child, you're just taking out anger on them or whatever the case may be. But then the other side of that is there are some times that there are parents who are inattentive to their children. They don't give them attention, they don't give them training, discipline, they don't teach them, they don't sit down and develop the relationship they should with them. And either way, you're hurting the child. Either way, it's abuse. If you're going to bring children into the world, what should your understanding be before you do that? That you are going to be an adult. You're going to be a parent. You're going to raise, take care of, provide for a child. Those are the thoughts that need to go into it before someone's going to parent a child. Why, the further our society has gone, used to, morals were different, just generally speaking, across our nation. The morality scene was different. There were people committing fornication and adultery and doing things years ago. It wasn't so open and it wasn't so widely accepted. The more open it's become and the more widely accepted it's become, the more it's just in your face. I mean, it's just out there all the time being talked about. It's shown on television. We read about it in just about any kind of print. As we think about what all is entailed in a society taking that viewpoint to sexual promiscuity, what's one of the consequences? What we're talking about here, one of the consequences is a lot of unplanned children. A lot of children born out of marriage, a lot of children born that nobody was anticipating. They weren't preparing themselves to be parents. You know, you don't have to be prepared to be a parent to bring a child into the world. All you have to do is commit sin. And a lot of children are being brought into this world in a situation. The child is not sinful. They're being brought in a sinful situation. The parents were involved in sin. Now a child is here. What do you do with the child? Well, we've understood this problem for a long time. That's why back in 1973, there was a law passed and from the federal government side that legalized abortion up through, you could not stop abortion up through 3 months. What do you do when you've got a baby on the way and you're not prepared to have a baby? There's an answer to this. The answer is stop doing the thing that causes babies. That's the answer. That's God's answer. You don't want a child? Don't, this is an adult class. There's no children in here, right? You don't want a child? Don't have sex. Okay? That's the answer to that. Abstinence. I saw a cartoon years ago. The first scene, the woman was in the doctor's office and he was telling her that this birth control method was this much effective and this one was this much and this. She said, well, I want something that's 100% effective. And he said, abstinence. And she said, can you write me a prescription for that? And they didn't even know what it meant. It was lighthearted. But you know, that's the problem. People say, well, it's just our culture to do these things. Stop. If you're going to bring a child into the world, you better be ready to bring a child into the world and raise that child, train that child. And a lot of times, because of the way societies do, a lot of this falls on the mother. Who does God write to here through Paul? Fathers.
Isn't there something different about Paul writing in this? I read, he's probably, he's kind of writing of household rules. It's pretty common in the time.
That's right.
But Paul puts a lot more on the guy
Yes, he does.
than anybody else.
Yes. From a biblical perspective, typically, who is in the home more? The father or the mother? Mother. Historically, not just biblically, but history. Most societies. Who's in the home more? Mothers. When Paul, by inspiration, writes here in chapter 5 about the roles of the husband and wife, he builds off of that right here in chapter 6 and says the responsibility of what's taking place in the home falls on the head. Not that the wife, the mother, is not involved and has no responsibility. That's not the point. The point is God has set roles. The head, the helpmeet. And when it comes to answering, giving an account for someone else, the one who's put in the role of the head will give an account for his spouse. The one who's in the role as the head will give an account for his children in a different way. So while some look at this and always want to look at the idea of feminism and no, I'm going to be the equal. And God, there's nothing here that says that husband and wife are not equal. Their roles are different. And in the different giving of the roles, there's different responsibility that's placed on the husband, on the father, than on being the wife or the mother. Different. There's still responsibility, it's just different. And the accountability is different. He says, fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Tell me some of the Bible fathers who did a good job. Abraham? God said that before Abraham even had his children. I know him. He's going to train them up and bring them up after him. Who else? That's right. They weren't flawless. Nothing said there, but he was a good father. Any other good pictures of biblical fathers? Joseph, apparently. Noah. How about bad ones? Y'all just named two of the prominent ones, Eli and David. Yes, yeah. There were a number of good ones. There were a number of bad ones. What was the difference between a good one and a bad one? It's real simple. Don't go too deep. Faithfulness. The ones who were faithful to God typically were good fathers. The ones who were unfaithful to God in some ways, they were being unfaithful at least in some ways. Look at what happens. Eli, who was Eli? Was Eli a faithful man of God? Yeah. He was a priest. He was a judge. But where did he drop the ball?
Didn't rule his children.
He was a priest. He was a judge. He was spending, apparently, the majority of his time working with the nation, with the people, and not at home. So when his sons got old enough to start running around and acting the fool, he did not restrain them. You know what that means? What does it mean to restrain someone? What does a police officer do when you're getting out of line and he's trying to talk to you and keep you calm and you get too far out of line? What does he do? He restrains you. Yeah, and he also may detain you, yes. But he restrains you. How does an officer restrain you?
With whatever he's got in his car, could be zip ties, could be
Okay. Typically, the idea we think of is handcuffs. You're going to restrain somebody so that you can control them so they can't get out of hand. You handcuff them and you stick them in the back seat of a squad car. They can't open the doors. They can't, even if they can reach it with their hands behind their back. What does it mean to restrain someone? It means to put them in check, to stop what they're doing, to make it where they can't do what they have been doing. And the idea is his sons were running wild, and he, being a priest and being a judge, should have raised up sons that could have been also helpful to Israel. Instead, he raised up sons who were rebellious and ungodly people. Not only could they not be used to the good of Israel, they were useless to Israel, harmful to Israel. And so he's judged in that capacity as a father, as a failure. Here's David, similar situation, but instead of being a judge and a priest, he's king. As king, he is the authority of the land under God. David was a faithful man, not flawless, but he was faithful. When he did wrong, he repented. One of the wrongs that he did when it came to parenting, he just didn't do well. His oldest son, Amnon, his daughter, Tamar, what happened? They were half brother and sister. He raped her. Not David. Amnon raped Tamar. And his son Absalom, who was a full brother to Tamar, half brother to Amnon, killed Amnon. What did he do with Amnon when Amnon raped Tamar? Nothing. What did he do with Absalom when Absalom killed Amnon? Didn't send him away. And then a little while later, when Absalom was ready, Absalom came back. Nothing. He failed as a father. He did not discipline, train, restrain, keep his children in line. That's what the fathers are being told here, bringing their children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. They are to teach, they are to train, they are to discipline, and do so in a way that can be received by the children. Are children always pleased when they're being trained and taught and disciplined? Let me ask you, were you always happy with it when you were a child growing up? I wasn't either. But did your parents do it in a way where even if you weren't momentarily happy with it, it could still be received and you could benefit from it? And later on even come to appreciate it more. Most parents try to do that. They work at that. Most Christian parents especially work to try to do that. The children aren't always going to be happy at the moment with what's happening, especially if they're in trouble about something. But if it's done in a way that they can receive it and learn from it and benefit from it and hopefully later come to appreciate it more, then that usually causes your children to respect you, to love you, to appreciate what you're doing, rather than turning against you, being rebellious. Have you seen, and of course there's varying degrees of the way parents choose to do it and the reception that the kids have of it. Have you seen parents that don't do anything toward their children and see a 12-year-old rise up in front of his father or his mother and basically dare them to do anything to them? It's terrible. It's also terrible to see a 12-year-old in another situation who's so beaten down and cowering that they can't do anything for themselves. You can go to an extreme either way, and it's bad. The hard thing we do as parents is work to try to find that good middle ground area of doing it properly, doing it faithfully, being instructed by God, and raise our children up so that they learn to love God and follow God. That's not an easy task. How is it that we have a whole generation of adults whose children get to be 12, 13, 14 years old and want to throw them out there in the world and tell them, go have fun. Just go do what you're going to do. And watch them start bringing children into the world, knowing full well they're not ready for this. The parents who have thrown their children to the wolves have done great wrong to their children. And then when the children are having children and the parents of the first set of children end up trying to help them raise their grandbabies, and it's a whole messed up system. That's not the way it's supposed to be. We need to get out of the mindset, well, that's just the way people do. It is the way people do, and they're wrong doing it. God set the family up as a structure, and we need to see what He gave, and we need to work to help our children and our grandchildren to follow that structure and see the wisdom in people responsibly going into the family relationship so that we can be godly, we can raise our children to be godly, and they can raise their children to be godly, and we can keep it going. It works when we listen to God. It doesn't work when we listen to society. Husbands and wives have proper roles to fill. Parents and children have proper roles to fill. The next few verses he talks about bondservants and masters. Now I know oftentimes when this type of discussion comes up, Old or New Testament, people immediately jump to early America, the United States of America, and talk about slavery, okay? Slavery as a person or people being taken and forced into labor is talked about in the Bible. It is never talked about as this is the best way to do things. Never. But when the church begins, when Christianity is now here, what we do not see Jesus when He was here. We don't see the apostles and the first century church going out, taking up swords and working to free everybody in the world. You know why they don't do that? Because number one, it's not God's purpose in sending Christ and bringing the church for the church to go and stamp out all the problems of the world. What is the purpose of the church? What's the work of the church? What's the purpose of the gospel? To save souls. And to have the place then where saved souls are gathered together. When individuals learn the gospel, are converted to Christ, put on Christ, and are working to live faithfully, what does that do to every human relationship that person has? It improves it. At least from their standpoint. It improves it. So then if the other person also becomes a Christian, what happens to the relationship? No matter what it is. If it's marriage, husband and wife, and one of them, then maybe eventually both of them become Christians, what does that do to their relationship? Two people who are friends. Two people who are co-workers. Brother, sister, aunt, uncle in the flesh. Blood relations. When you work with someone, for someone, serve someone. What different types of service, what different relationships of service do we know from history and even from biblical history? There were some, like the Israelites in Egypt, who were free there, guests, and then were turned into slaves there. Forced working. And treated them badly at times. Very bad. So badly they cried out to God until He delivered them. So we see, okay, that's kind of the extreme. From free and blessed and a welcome guest in the land to complete slavery. We're going to kill your male children so you can't rise up against us, slavery. That's about as strong as you can get. What else do we see?
Loomis bought from was sold.
Joseph was sold.
Joseph
Okay.
was sold, but his life turned out better.
Well,
I mean,
I don't know. We'd have to talk to Joseph and find out if it was better all the way.
Well, I mean,
He went from being the favored son at home to being sold as a slave to being brought into Potiphar's house and made a trusted servant, and then finally second in command in Egypt and saved his family that sold him into slavery. Yeah. But you know what he said about that to his brothers? You meant that for evil, but God meant it for good. You reckon he went through some hard times? He did. We read about a little bit of it. But he actually became a servant in several different capacities. He's a good one to talk about. Slave, servant in a man's house, did so well, everything he did was great. So he's a very trusted servant in that man's house. Ends up being put in prison because of the man's wife. Ends up being brought out of prison because of interpreting dreams. Finally is second in command in the nation and saves his family during the time of famine. So several different, he was a servant of several different kinds, different names we would give it.
And it just shows you that God was with him all the way, suffering and all, and so
Yeah.
he never was forgotten by God. I guess we ought to look at it that way.
That's right.
He suffered, we know he ain't gonna forget us.
That's right. Think about throughout history, maybe European history and some here in the United States from all through our years here. People have been butlers and maids and different kinds of servants. What kind of servants are butlers and maids? Usually hired servants. Either hired servants in the sense that they wanted a job. There's somebody over here who has money and they say, we'll give you a job. They do the work. They get paid for it. Who else does that kind of work?
a nanny.
Who else does? You're right.
A nanny, yeah.
You're right. About 99.9% of us do those kind of jobs, right? There's somebody that has a business that has the money, the capital, and they say, I need workers so that as we produce, we'll get more and I'll pay you. And most of us work that kind of service. You realize that when you look at it from that perspective, you are being a hired servant. I'm going to pay you. You're going to do what I want you to do. So when you do this work and we make a product or we provide a service, whatever it is, and make the money on it, and I keep paying you, from that sense, we're by definition a hired servant. There are people who have debts. Maybe something happened and somebody helped them in a bad situation and they can't pay the money back. They don't have money, so they work for the person. I'll work for you this many hours of this many months or years, and when I've worked that time, instead of you paying me for that work, I'm doing that to pay back what I owe you. So you're still a hired servant. You're just working off a debt instead of getting a paycheck. So there's many different kinds of being a servant, many different layers or levels, if you will, of being a servant. So in this passage, don't look so deep that you start thinking about one thing and miss the point of the passage. Okay? You may be any kind of servant. You may be a slave, the way we think of it. You may be a servant working off a debt. You may be a hired servant getting paid for what you do. Or you may be the one paying someone, the one who's loaned somebody money and now they're working off a debt. There's a point to this, and the point is whether you are the master or whether you are the laborer, being a Christian is going to change who you are in that relationship and thus change the relationship. The ideal situation, if I'm working for somebody, is for me to be a Christian and be faithful to God, and for the person I'm working for to be a Christian and be faithful to God. That's the ideal. If you are a slave, I don't mean a hired, somebody comes in and has taken over our country and made me serve them. And that's the only choice. I don't have a choice. That's all I can do. You know what the best case scenario for that is? For me to be a Christian and be faithful to God, and for the one who is over me to also be a Christian and be faithful to God. What's that going to do? It's going to change the nature of our working relationship, so that I'm not going to hate your guts and only want bad things for you because you don't treat me badly and you don't hate me, and we can actually work together and benefit each other. What does he say here? Bondservants, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in sincerity of heart, as to Christ. Now, if I am the servant, the worker, the laborer, and someone is over me, and I'm a Christian, and I'm being faithful to God, and they are not, do Christians sometimes suffer under worldly employers, worldly masters? Sometimes. But do you know what every employer, master, whatever title they may have, or you want to call them, do you know what every one of them wants from their employees? From the people who serve them? Faithfulness, dedication. That you're a good worker, you produce well, you're not slacking or shirking. You don't just leave and go do something else. You don't stay on your phone all day long, right? Unless that's your job. Maybe you're making calls for the business. But if you're not hiding around the corner and playing games on your phone. And you're a worker, a hard worker. Somebody who's going to be honest with them, produce for them, make sure that everything goes well. Typically, if you're that kind of employee, even if you've got a very worldly boss, how do they treat you? Typically, they respect you, they appreciate you, and typically they'll treat you as well as they can and want to. That's typical. There are exceptions to the rule. But if that person who's the boss is also a Christian, that changes things drastically. Now, he says, whether they're a Christian or not, if you're the servant, if you're the worker, the laborer, you don't treat this situation as if you're just working for them. You be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in sincerity of heart, as to Christ. You be a faithful, loyal, hardworking servant, no matter who the other person is, no matter how they behave, no matter how initially they may treat you. Hopefully, if you are who you're supposed to be with some time, if they start off treating you not well, that will change. But even if it doesn't, you're being paid to do a job, do the job. It is a fallacy of thinking which shows a character problem when you work for someone who is harsh, who is mean, who is ugly to you, who doesn't treat you or anybody else that works for them well. It's a fallacy of thinking and a character flaw to say, then I will cheat them anytime I get a chance. That says something about me. Okay?
You also don't want to abuse your friendship. I mean, you're like, oh, my boss is cool with me. He'll let me do this and this and this and this. No, you have a job to do.
That's right.
People respect you more to do the job and not just say, oh, hey, boss, can I get off this weekend? You know?
That's right.
Go fishing with you.
Well, and I was saying some of that for this reason. Typically, the human reaction to goodness is goodness. Typically. The reaction to kindness is kindness. When you do something as simple as see somebody out on the street in a workplace, wherever you may be, and they're not smiling, and you smile and nod and wave a little bit, you know, typically they want to respond in like fashion, right? Same is true with an attitude that somebody's seeing day in and day out. If you're a worker that comes in and you've got a smile on your face and you're happy that you're healthy and able to do this job today, and you do it well, and you do it diligently, faithfully, and when you make your reports to whoever you make them to, you do it with a good attitude and demeanor, typically speaking, they like to see you coming. They appreciate what you do. They want to hear from you. And when you come to them and say, hey, I've noticed a difficulty over here, what about this? They receive it better than the person that's always a problem, always complaining, always shirking their responsibilities. But that's a secondary issue. That's a response issue from the other person. First and foremost, as a servant, I'm being faithful to God in the way I do my job. Faithful to God. I am serving a person and giving them the due respect of their position, the boss, whatever their title is. I'm giving them due respect, the fear and trembling, the understanding of my role and their role, and I'm serving them with sincerity of heart. I'm doing the job that I'm supposed to do, and I'm receiving the wages that I'm supposed to receive. If I'm not doing the job with sincerity of heart, if I'm not doing it the way that I should, and I'm receiving the wage, what am I doing? I'm cheating. Stealing. I'm not treating it right. No matter who the other person is, or how they treat me, or how they treat anybody else around, I'm doing this because of who I am, who I choose to be, as a servant of God. I'm doing it as if I'm doing it for Christ. That's going to change who I am, regardless of who they are and what they choose to do. Notice he says in verse 6, not with eye service as men pleasers. You're driving down the road. You're a good person, a good citizen. You're obedient. You do things right. When you're driving down the road and you come around a curve and there's a police officer in his vehicle sitting off in the bushes over there, what do you do? First thing. If you're like me, I'll tell you what I do. I look down at my speedometer. I'm not driving around intending to break the law, but I realize if I'm not paying attention, I could be. So when I see him, it's an immediate reminder, and I look at the speedometer. Why do I do that? Because he's an authority, right? In that respect of government, of law, he's the boss. She's the boss. When I pass to see that car, I make sure when I go by that car. What happens when they pull out behind you? No lights. They're just pulling out, moving, going to another place. But they drive behind you for 5 miles.
You turn off as soon as you can.
No, I keep going. Because I wasn't intending to break the law in the first place. If I wasn't doing anything wrong, they'd pull out and they're just traveling the same way I am. I tell you what I do for the 5 miles there behind me. I drive more conscientiously than at any other time during the day. I mean, I always want to stay between the lines, right? That's what you're supposed to do. Keeps everybody safe. Not only is it legal, it keeps everybody safe. But buddy, I don't vary. I look at this spot on my vehicle and this spot on my vehicle, and I know where they meet the lines where in my vision, and I hold it there. And if I didn't already, I set my cruise control. And I look at every sign that I pass to make sure there's not a drop in the speed limit right here. Okay? I do that when he's behind me, yes, because I'm well aware of who he is, who she is. I know their authority. So I'm not going to buck that. If I just happen to see them and go by them, it does make me go, okay, let me evaluate. But all the time, I work to obey the law. I'm not trying to break the law all the time and then only slow down when I see an officer. You keep doing that, you'll start getting stopped. Because they hide in places where you don't see them till it's too late. Right? So I always work to obey the law. Seeing the officer just is a reminder. It causes me to evaluate right now what I'm doing. The point he's making here is that's the kind of life we ought to be living. All the time doing what's right. Yeah, boss may walk by, and that makes you think, evaluate what I'm doing. But I should have been doing what I'm supposed to be doing already. So that if the boss walks by, it's not a big deal. Even though it may surprise me for a moment, make me go, am I following all the rules? Am I doing it right? Yes, I am. Good, keep doing it. That's the way we should be living. We shouldn't be living recklessly, illegally, breaking the rules, breaking the laws, and only straighten up when we know somebody's watching us. That's the whole point. Or do you sloughing off at work, sitting there doing something else, when the boss comes in, throw it down and start doing what you're supposed to. You know you're doing something wrong. You know that's not who you're supposed to be. It doesn't matter whether the boss is watching or not. What matters is that you are going to be the kind of servant who is of such character that whether the boss is even at work that day or not, they know what you're going to be doing. They know how you're going to produce, what kind of job you're going to do. They know it, you know it, everybody around you knows it. Why? Because you're a Christian. And it comes through in every part of who you are. The character of who you are in your relationship as husbands and wives should show up all the time. The character of who you are as parents and children should be there all the time. The character of who you are as a servant, an employee, a worker, should be there all the time. It doesn't show up when the boss does. But you're doing this as if you are bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. I want you to notice that's twice now that he said from the heart, in the heart. We read that statement in like Romans 6. God be thanked that you were the servants of sin, but you have obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine which was delivered you. Being then made free from sin, you became the servants of righteousness. When we talk about obeying the gospel and the salvation of the soul and our response to God's sacrifice and call for us, the heart comes into that a lot in biblical teaching. It's about the response of the entirety of who you are. Not just a moment's fleeting decision, but the heart of an individual being converted to following Christ, to following God. Obedience from the heart. As you go through Romans, you see that brought out in three different points. The circumcision is not of the flesh made with hands. It's the circumcision of the heart. We see this repeatedly in Romans. And the idea that Paul is bringing out, by the way, the same man who penned Romans, also penned this and says, when you're working for someone, you work as if you're working for Christ and you obey from the heart. You do what you do from your heart, from your inner person, from your character as who you are. So the boss knows if I'm sitting here watching what you're doing, it's going to be good. If I leave and go somewhere else, leave the premises entirely, go somewhere else, I'm gone for a week, I know what you're going to be doing all week. I know what you're going to produce. I know how you're going to be as a worker. Why? Because your character shows all the time. It shouldn't only pop up as good when the boss is looking. You're not doing this to be a pleaser of other people. You're doing this as you're serving Christ. You're doing this as you're a servant of God. And you do it, verse 7, with good will. With good will doing service, as to the Lord and not to men. What does it mean to have good will? I know we have a store you can go to that's called Goodwill. Why is it called Goodwill? What's the point of the store? Good intent. Goodwill operates on donations, right? People donate things, then they turn around and sell it at a much cheaper price than you could ever go buy it at the store. It may be lightly used. It may be brand new stuff. It's never been used before. But you get it at a better price because somebody else donated it. There's good intent, goodwill. The desire to do good for someone else. He says you serve and you work for an employer, for a master, a boss, a foreman, whoever and whatever title they may have. The work you do for them, you are doing for them, and you're doing it with goodwill toward them, but you're doing it as if you're serving the Lord, because you are serving the Lord. You are a servant of God, and that's going to be present in your character in whatever you're doing along the way. We'll stop right here. Lord willing, next week we'll pick this up. Well, not next week. Our gospel meeting is next week, so in 2 weeks we'll pick it up.
Good evening. If you want to mark number, oh, I just lost it. Where'd it go? 488, the Song of Invitation, 488. Let's turn to 624 together, 624. Let's sing the first and last of 624, and then we'll have our devotional thought. Sing with me. Each day I'll do a golden deed by helping those who are in need. My life on earth is but a span, and so I'll do the best I can. I've seen the sun is sinking low. A few more days. The deeds that I have done, where there will be no setting sun. While going down life's weary road, I'll try to live some traveler's load. I'll try to turn the night to day, make flowers bloom along the way. Life's sinking sun is sinking low. A few more days, I must go to meet the deeds that I have done, where there will be no setting sun. A couple weeks ago, after work, I ran into the grocery store over in Bremen. And as I was walking in the door, this lady walked up to me and she said, "Do I know you?" And I said, "I don't know." And she said, "You have to be a Gray. I can just tell by looking at you." And, you know, when I was a young man, that's the kind of thing that might make me kind of shudder. Ugh. You know, because when you're a kid, you're kind of embarrassed of your parents a little bit, you know. But now in my life, when she said that, I kind of poked up my chest a little bit with pride. And I'm like, yeah, I'm a Gray. Because I think back to my dad and my grandfather and the other members of that family that I know that I'm proud of, that the things that they've done with their lives. And so I took some pride that I was recognized to be a part of that family. And later on, when I was thinking about it, I thought about how in Romans 8:29, Paul says that those of us that were chosen by God were chosen to be conformed in the image of his Son. And so I was thinking about, you know, how nice it would be if you walked in somewhere and somebody said, "Are you a child of God?" I could just tell by looking at you. I can tell by the way that you live your life. I can tell by the way that you talk who you belong to. And so my thought for you all tonight is that should be our goal, is that we can be recognized by who we belong to. And if you have a reason tonight that we can encourage you, pray for you, or study with you, or help you in any way, then this is the opportunity that we normally would invite you to come and let us know how we can help you while we stand and sing. Have thine own way, Lord, have thine own way. Thou art the potter, I am the clay. Mold me and make me after thy will, while I am waiting, yielded and still. Have thine own way,
evening. Got just a few announcements, nothing new, but some reminders from Sunday. Let's not forget, this coming Sunday, we'll start our gospel meeting, so please make plans to be here. Also, we're using that Sunday morning in our Bible class and worship as an attendance drive. So be reaching out to family and friends to invite them to our services. We are striving to break that 210 once again. We'll be doing the fellowship meal right after the morning worship and our 2 p.m. service Sunday. And then through the week, each of the groups are providing dinners. So make sure to look at the bulletin as far as when your group is assigned a night for providing the meals. EYC sign-up sheet. This Sunday's not the deadline, but the next Sunday. Yeah. So still got a little bit of time, guys that may be interested in EYC, but you need to kind of get that on your mind and get your name on the sign-up sheet. Week from Sunday will be the deadline for that. Don't forget, October 27th through the 29th is our family retreat coming up, so there's a sign-up sheet on that as well. And it's been advertised a few times, but don't forget, men, anybody interested in the Backwoods Men's Retreat, see Scott for that. And after we dismiss the elders and deacons, if you will, just go out to the pavilion shortly after this so we can meet briefly and talk through something and let everybody get back to what they want to do. And then Joe's birthday is today. Joe Engelberg, if those y'all. Huh? Glenn's is tomorrow? Your birthday's tomorrow? Well, we got 2 birthdays we need to. Jason's is Saturday. Jason too, all right. We'll get all of y'all to embarrass. Yeah, that's what I heard about Joe's. You got? Great. So the kidney transplant surgery was today, wasn't it? This morning, maybe? Both in that transplant are doing well, so that's good to hear. Great. Great to hear. Anything else?
Josh, the fall festival.
Yes.
On the
October 22nd, we got the Fall Festival coming up at 4 o'clock that day. Thank you. Tommy? And October 14th is going to be the Morrow Hayride. Both those will be fun weekends to enjoy. Anything else? If not, we'll bow in prayer and then sing happy birthday. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day you've made. Thank you for our opportunity to gather together in this building to assemble as the church and to study your word together, to sing songs together, to praise you. We pray that as we depart, you'll please be with each and every one of us. Strengthen us as we go out into the world. May we be the light and the salt that you've commanded. In Christ's name we pray, amen.